Guy, do you want me to start? I mean, it's time. I think if you don't mind, I would prefer that we started. We know that there's one absence. Anyway, hello everyone. Welcome to Development Control B, and welcome actually to first of all, the annual general meeting of DCB. I will go through some brief safety instructions in case there is a fire alarm. We are not expecting a fire alarm test today, so it will be a real fire alarm, and so please exit from the main door where you came in and turn to the right and head to the assembly point, which is the paved area in front of the cathedral. And we have toilets out here to the left and right, so welcome to everyone, especially guests and those watching online. Annual general meeting, we are asked to note what was approved at the AGM of full council, which is that myself, I have been chosen as chair again of DCB, Councillor Guy Portney as vice chair, the membership as listed in the agenda, the terms of reference again as in the agenda. Are people okay with those? No questions. I mean, we have approved them as part of the full council's process, but if anyone didn't realise that. Now, dates of future meetings. I'm going to ask if we wouldn't mind. So we have the dates there. We alternate between 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. so as to share out the challenges of those who find afternoons difficult and those who find evenings difficult. So 50% of the meetings you will find difficult, etc., etc. I wonder if I can ask if we can, instead of 16th of July being a 6 p.m, it would be a 2 p.m. And then following on from that, we would still be 6 p.m, 2 p.m, 6 p.m, 2 p.m. Does anyone have a problem with that? Okay, thank you. So 16th of July will be a 2 p.m. and changes as follows from that. Okay, so apologies for absence. Councillor Breckles is unable to make it today, and we've not got a replacement for him. Do we have any other apologies for absence? No? Declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declarations of interest? No? Minutes of the previous meeting and action sheet. Are you happy for me to sign these, or do you have any amendments that you would like to make to the minutes of the previous meeting? Speak now. No. We're all okay? Okay, so we will sign those. And we move on then to appeals. Simone, would you like to run through the appeals in the agenda, and I'll give the opportunity for members to ask any questions they would like about specific appeals, or we could even broaden it to any other appeal in things that perhaps you've got going on, and general discussion of appeals. Thank you.
I wasn't going to run through them because there's a rather large number.
Anything you'd like to highlight, especially ones that put our service in a good light. This is your opportunity to.
Right, I think we were particularly proud to have had, although I'm not sure that is still listed here, we had an appeal dismissed for against the Wye Vale Garden Centre. That was an inquiry back in February. There is also the enforcement appeals listed here. The inquiries happened last week or the week before, although it's adjourned, and a further day of inquiry will be happening in about 2 weeks' time, rather. So again, that's a really important one for us to hopefully win.
Which one is that?
It's under,
Is it under enforcement or is it under appeals?
it was under appeals, enforcement appeals. Let me
Okay.
see whether I can find, it was under the by inquiry as well. So I'm sure I saw that earlier. 229 Coronation Road and 57
Oh, yes,
Islington
it's
Road.
under public inquiry, yes, okay.
Yeah, number 6 and 7. Yeah,
Yes.
thank you. So top of page 19. And then the other one I thought might be worthwhile, just sort of thinking ahead of the rest of our, what's on the agenda. Number 61 is maybe worthwhile noting that we lost an appeal. So where the appeal was allowed, where it was also a small HMO was proposed to be increased to a large HMO, and the inspector allowed that. And in fact, that happened before as well. That's at least the second case that we are aware of. So that they are quite very difficult to defend.
A point of learning for us all.
Mm-hmm. Number 61 in the list.
162 Monks Park Avenue. Thank you. But it is good to see that the 6 and 7, that we are actually pursuing those enforcement notices. I'm sure that involves quite an amount of resource.
An awful lot of resource, but yes, we are taking it very seriously and, putting our all into it.
It's good because I know councillors feels a little frustrated sometimes with the amount of resource that they feel is going into enforcement, but actually here's 2 cases where we are actually taking it to public inquiry. Anybody got any questions? Guy.
Thank you, Chair. Just on this subject, the enforcement statistics have been an increasing concern to me over quite a protracted period of time now. We seem to be actually issuing enforcement notices in less than 2% of cases over the previous yearly cycle. We're slightly ahead of that now, in that we've served 2 out of 94 case closed so far. I do appreciate 30 of the complaints, no breach of plan and control was found. But in 61 cases, there was a breach. And for us to find that we're only serving enforcement notices in 2 of those cases strikes me as being on the low side. What has given me greater cause for concern is the number of items of casework I'm now dealing with in my ward, where we've had enforcement requested, complaints made in terms of breaches of planning, that are now being not even regularised through retrospective application, but where we're simply deciding not to enforce irrespective. And more than once I've been told it's on the basis that there's no reasonable prospect of conviction, or it's because it's not in the public interest. And what that seems to reflect is a delay in actually processing the complaint. And there's such a time lag between the complaint being received and the attempts made to regularise the situation, or the attempts made to get the developer to do something, that in other words, the resource demand of processing enforcement and processing the complaint grows and grows and grows to the point where it ceases to be worthwhile to continue. And that doesn't strike me as being a good reason for not enforcing. That strikes me as being an area where, with a little more resource, we might actually be able to do a little more. But I'm genuinely worried now by just how few cases we seem to be progressing enforcement, and the grounds particularly on which we're not. I feel this is something we should refer these statistics to Economy and Skills as the responsible policy committee, to ask them to take a look at this and to see what can be done to improve these outcomes, because I'm
Thanks.
genuinely concerned.
You do occasionally do a report for Economy and Skills, don't you, Simone? Do you want to comment on that? Or we had a briefing, didn't we, a few months ago on enforcement. I don't think that entirely answered your question, point that you made, which I think has a certain validity. But
We have covered the, so we do performance updates, which we have done every 6 months so far, and that included enforcement. It's absolutely recognised that enforcement is in a way the area where we've only been able to start later in terms of with performance recovery, simply because we had to, prioritise and sort of stage it. We have actually made a good start. We have put more resource into enforcement as of last September 24. We put 2 extra people into it. Unfortunately, one of them is already moved on elsewhere, so it is also a question of actually retraining. But we have replaced that now, so that we're back to the. But what I'm saying is, it's not easy. Resource doesn't resolve everything. What we're also in the process of doing is actually updating the local enforcement plan and reviewing how we do things so that we can make the most impact with the resource that we have. Because, even when we try to recruit, you don't necessarily get somebody. So we have been relying a lot more on growing our own, but we are actually starting to see good traction. And, we have closed more, albeit not many more cases than came in over that quarter. We are seeing that backlog in enforcement also being reduced, but also new cases. So rather than doing things chronologically, making sure that new cases are being dealt with promptly. There are, basically, enforcement notices are a bit like a last resort. So you need to explore all other options first, and only at that point do you serve the notice. And basically, there is still a large number of other action ongoing on many other cases, and which may well lead to more enforcement notices down the line. But basically, what I'm saying is the difference is it means that there is also a large number of cases in hand and ongoing.
Mm. Yes, Guy. Do you want to let Caroline speak, or do you want to follow up on?
Just to add to that, I was just thinking, around the finances. One of the ones that I've got ongoing is where a house was developed and there's a side road, which is an adopted road that goes down the side of it. And they dug it up to build the foundations. And then when they backfilled it, they didn't backfill it to the right level. And so the coping stones at the side keep falling, keep moving every time someone drives over them. And when I put it through to enforcement, they said, there isn't a problem. But there is. And we're going to have to now get the transport department to fix it. Okay. I'll send it to Pip. And I was just thinking, it'll cost the transport department more because it costs loads to do roads. So we'll save the council more money if we can actually get the developer to fix it.
Mm. Yeah, that's a case of someone damaging our infrastructure, and that should report it to highways. I wouldn't see that as a planning matter primarily. It happened during a development process. But
anything that impacts road safety is dealt with under the Highway and Transport Acts because it's road safety, even if it's where a construction or something has imploded or onto the highway. We, Sean Taylor's team will be able to do that, but come through to me and I'll make sure it gets the right. Sometimes planning enforcement isn't the appropriate place for that, but highway safety is one of our highest important things, so never feel embarrassed to ask me to help you sort that out.
You got a good offer there, Caroline. I'd take that one up. Guy?
Thank you, Chair. I think I just wanted to flag, because obviously of the 4 criteria that these are reported to us, no breach of planning control found. Obviously, it's fairly self-explanatory. I would wonder how many of those are borderline cases, but it makes sense. planning enforcement notice served obviously suggests something's being taken forward, but we don't know how many of those notices served actually result in a correction, as in how many of those resolve the situation to the satisfaction of the council. Breach removed through negotiation, I assume, just is where they submit a retrospective planning application and the situation is regularised. However, what worries me is that other one, is that below intervention threshold suggests not sufficiently important to warrant action, not sufficiently important to warrant the deployment of resource. But when you follow that little asterisk,
I think you said two different things there. Not sufficiently important to warrant action, not sufficiently important to warrant resource. There are things, aren't there, that you wouldn't act upon, even though they are strictly speaking, you know, a slight different on the roof, the colour of the tiles, slightly different or something. There are things that.
oh, Chair, I
There is
concur absolutely.
a place for discretion, is what I'm saying.
Oh no, I concur completely. There are those issues. What I'm questioning is the logic in lumping those together with, for example, a situation where a complaint's been ongoing for 7 or 8 years, where the Ombudsman has found fault with the council's failure to make a determination as to whether to enforce or not, where the developer has been invited to regularise the situation, has not complied with the notice informing that they have to make this good, a second notice that they have to regularise it with a planning
You're referring
application.
to a specific case, aren't you now?
I'm referring to a specific example that is in the public domain because the Ombudsman found against us in the case that I'm thinking of. That comes under the same criteria as you say, the below the threshold de minimis thing in terms of how it's reported to us. And I think we need something more granular so that we can see where there is a specific and significant issue that we fail to resolve through all of the other means at our disposal, and yet still we do not serve an enforcement notice. Those, I think, need to be broken apart.
I think we can certainly look at things again. We will be looking at it again as well anyway as part of updating the local enforcement plan. I think if I'm thinking of the right example that you're thinking of, then it wouldn't be reported under below intervention threshold. And I think, you know, some things are simply where the legislation is such that you end up with situations where, yes, we serve an enforcement notice, but if it comes to the point where it doesn't get complied with, there then comes a different test of whether you actually enforce it through the courts. And it may not be always expedient to enforce it through the courts, but that would not be reported under below intervention threshold.
Chair, if I may, I will
No,
let
one
this
more-
go
one more
points.
go.
I promise.
Right. It's-
I will check. I believe that is exactly what happened in this case. The initial enforcement notice was withdrawn to enable the drawing up of a second enforcement notice when the developer continued to develop along these lines. The second enforcement notice was simply never served. I believe owing to an administrative oversight, there was then a 3-year delay. I say identified by the Ombudsman, not by me. The Ombudsman came out and said, there is fault because of this delay. And yet still we end up in a point where we're unable to take enforcement action because of our own failure to investigate the complaint. That's what's concerning me.
You know, and we are absolutely committed to enforcing and investigating promptly. That's why we're doing all the work about improving the service. The case, I don't think it is the same case now that we're thinking of, and it doesn't, I suppose, doesn't really matter because to an extent, you know, history is what it is. All we can do is now make sure we improve the service as much as we can with the means that we've got available. And that's not just money.
And overall, that is a matter for the Economy and Skills Committee. So, you know, if we have more granular statistics, for us, that would be an advantage in order to be able to take the case to the Economy and Skills Committee to say that, as a regulatory committee, we would prefer that they allocated more resource to this particular area. That would be Councillor Brown. Thank you, everyone. We will now move on to the one item on our agenda for today, which is 87 Wick Road, Bristol, and going to ask. We have no public forum, I believe. Does anyone want to disagree with me on that one? Yes, sorry, we don't have anyone. What I meant was, Alison's quite correct. We do have public forum, but nobody is here to present any of those. So we have noted the items as given to us in the agenda. So we'll go on to the presentation. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a full application for the change of use from a single dwelling to a 6-bedroom HMO for up to 9 occupants at 87 Wick Road. A decision on this application was deferred at the DCB committee in January, and this was to allow for further investigation and also for officers to work with the developer on the noise concerns which were raised by the committee, and also issues to do with compliance with planning policies, including policy DM2, policy DM30, and also policy DM35. So the site consists of a 2-storey mid-terrace dwelling. Here the images show the front of the property from Wick Road. And here we have some images that show the rear garden of the property. That's the image on the left. And then the image on the right shows a rear access path which essentially exits out onto Manworthy Road to the north. Here is a location plan of the site. You will also be able to note on this the locations for the proposed waste and recycling store, which would be to the front of the property, and also the cycle store to the rear. So here are the existing floor plans. The property currently has 3 bedrooms, and as mentioned, it's in use as a single family dwelling house. So here are the proposed floor plans. So the development would include internal alterations, which would result in the creation of 6 bedrooms and associated bathrooms and kitchen and living space for occupants. The applicant initially advised that the intended occupation was for 6 occupiers. However, it appeared that some rooms could potentially be occupied by 2 people, so the application is assessed as accommodating up to 9. All of the room sizes appear to accord with the standards which are set out within the HMO licensing scheme, which is the relevant standard that we would assess an application against, and this also includes the required number of bathrooms. Following the previous committee, the proposals have been updated to show some additional sound insulation measures, and this is shown on the floor plans with the red lines. So essentially it's now proposed to add sound insulation to the party walls on both sides of the property at the ground, the first and the second floor level. So in terms of the additional information following the deferral, we've also had a sound insulation report that's been submitted to essentially accompany the plan, which now shows where the sound insulation will be provided. This also sets out the details of the tests that have been undertaken with regard to noise. The actual material is proposed to be sound block plasterboard, and we've also had the revised proposals again, which show the refuse store to the front garden and the cycle store to the rear garden. So here is a plan showing the cycle store. So this would be to the rear, and here is the refuse store, which would be to the front of the property. The application also proposes some fairly minor external changes that would mainly relate to changes to windows and also the addition of roof lights to the front and the rear roof slopes. In terms of the consultation on the application, so the application was referred to committee by the ward member, by Councillor Hornchen, and we received a high number of objections initially. So there were 54 that were received before the previous committee, and this was as a result of 2 rounds of public consultation. And I've summarised the reasons on the slide, but the concerns raised related to the overconcentration of HMOs within the area, concerns regarding the loss of a family-sized home and also the need for those, the undermining of community cohesion, also concerns regarding the living conditions and the over-intensive nature of the occupation, also concerns regarding potential pollution as a result of noise and antisocial behaviour to neighbouring occupiers, and also concerns regarding increases in parking pressure and inadequate cycle storage and access. So following the previous committee and the submission of the further information, a further reconsultation exercise has been undertaken, which has resulted in 12 further objections. Again, the concerns here really relate to noise mainly and impact on neighbour amenity. Also concerns as well with regard to the siting of the refuse store and the cycle stores. In terms of comments from consultees, so we have also reconsulted with pollution control colleagues. They have considered the report that's been undertaken and also the details provided with regard to sound insulation. In summary, they consider that what's now proposed should really minimise noise disturbance from any kind of normal, reasonable use of the HMO. However, in reality, it may not sort of block out sort of all noise, but they consider that it's to a reasonable standard and don't raise an objection subject to a condition, and also an additional advice regarding impacts from construction noise. In terms of transport development management, again, there are no objections due to the sustainable location of the site. Just moving on to the issue of the concentration of HMOs and sandwiching. Again, following the previous committee, officers have investigated again the situation with regard to the concentration of HMOs in the area. With reference to the SPD, there are essentially sort of 2 tests that need to be looked at. The first is with regard to the percentage of HMOs of the housing stock within a 100-metre radius of the site, and this is known as the area level assessment. So again, sort of the tipping point here is around sort of 10%, where it's really considered that above that, the negative impacts of HMOs are likely to occur. Having looked into that again, the current level of concentration is 3.57, and with the additional HMO, that would rise to 4.44. Also, with regard to sandwiching, again, the situation would be here that, again, in terms of the HMO SPD, no sandwiching would occur. And I just wanted to highlight as well here the relevance of Manworthy Road and Rossall Road to the north of the neighbouring property, and just to highlight that would be considered a separating road in terms of the HMO SPD. So to conclude then, the concerns that have been raised by neighbours are noted and have been duly considered. However, officers have assessed the proposals and consider that the proposal would not create a harmful concentration of HMOs in the locality, nor result in a sandwiching effect. The details of the sound insulation that have been provided are considered to be acceptable, and a condition is recommended. This is also the case with the cycle and waste and recycling stores. As mentioned, the site is considered to be in a sustainable location and isn't considered to give rise to unacceptable impacts on highway safety. And finally, as well, just to note, because the site is located within an area that isn't covered by an Article 4 direction, there is the potential for a fallback position here where a small HMO could be brought into use without the need for planning permission. So essentially, the assessment really involves considering the impact of 3 additional occupiers. So in summary, the application is considered to be acceptable and it's therefore recommended for approval subject to the conditions as set out in the report.
Thank you, Jonathan. Questions? Please raise your hand if you would like to ask a question. Councillor Portney.
Apologies, Chair, a little predictably. The sandwiching test is non-exhaustive, isn't it? It's illustrative, that's my understanding. As in something could be sandwiched that wasn't covered by the examples listed in the SPD.
So yeah, in terms of the methodology, the HMO SPD is quite clear as to what constitutes a sandwiching situation, and yeah, it acknowledges that that sandwiching situations apply irrespective of limited breaks in the building line, and it says such as vehicular or pedestrian access apart from a separating road. So in terms of the interpretation of that, obviously the building line really follows the line which is created by the frontages, and it's clear here that the road to the north does intersect that building line. So yeah, officers consider that it follows, yeah, in terms of that SPD guidance, that a sandwiching situation wouldn't occur here.
That was a good answer, but I'm still... Just to be clear, sandwiching could occur in ways not illustrated within the policy. That's correct, isn't it? And just for clarity on a couple of other things, in terms of policy DM2, obviously the SPD and DM2, in fact, look at the impacts that HMOs can have, including things like impact on waste management, highway safety concerns, impact on social cohesion, these sorts of things. Obviously, the SPD on HMOs solely regards that from context to HMOs, but DM2 would potentially allow a wider interpretation of that, as in acknowledging that HMOs can contribute to those things, but so can other things. As in, you could have a concentration of HMOs that didn't meet the HMO concentration test, but in concert with other things, for example, that produce additional noise or produce additional waste management challenges, HMOs could contribute to problems that would be captured under DM2.
Yes, in response to that, in terms of policy DM2, it says obviously proposals for kind of HMOs won't be permitted where the development would create or contribute to a harmful concentration of such uses within the locality. So it's really talking about, again, housing that has been subdivided, and the HMO SPD is really there to provide the guidance on kind of the assessment of what constitutes harmful concentrations.
Can I just add, I think Jonathan already pointed it out at the end of the presentation. The real consideration here is not around should an HMO be allowed. HMO is allowed. It's already allowed. It is permitted development in this location because there is no Article 4. So what you're really considering is whether the increase from a small to a large HMO should be allowed.
Yes, thank you. No, it's the increase in the factor that can cause these impacts that I think we're all on that page. So final question for now, I think, but just apologies, I'm squinting away at the pinpoint map on the screen. When I bring it up on my laptop, something curious came up, which was that there are some, when you select the HMOs by criteria, as in you look at the additional and mandatory HMO pending applications, the mandatory HMO licenses, the additional HMO licenses, and the HMO planning permissions, you obviously get a load of little icons all over the screen. And I realised that some of them had two. Some of them had planning permission and a licence. And obviously I can appreciate that a property might have planning consent to be used as an HMO that wasn't currently in use as an HMO. So in other words, it would form part of the concentration assessment, but wasn't currently in use. But how is it that something could be licensed as an HMO without having planning consent at this point, this long since policy changed? If somewhere has an HMO license, surely it would also now have to have planning consent too.
Not necessarily, because in this is an area that isn't covered by an Article 4 direction. So there is essentially a permitted change of use from a C3 dwelling to a C4 HMO. So that change of use can happen here without the need for planning permission. In those areas that are covered by an Article 4, we've essentially removed that permitted development right.
I suppose in which case, if somewhere didn't have planning permission because it didn't need it and didn't yet have a license, if for example, someone had applied for a license or previous license had expired but hadn't received its new license yet, it wouldn't appear on this map at all.
No,
it wouldn't have been counted, even though it would be in use currently as an HMO.
We can speculate that there are HMOs conducting their business without licenses, certainly, but we can't bring that into our calculations because, in fact, it's pure speculation that is going on.
Yeah, essentially. No, thank you. I do appreciate that. I do think that's a fine point. It's purely in a context where we're seeing the statistics we're seeing, and then there are. My count was 98 objections to this application on the planning portal site. It feels like something has slipped.
No, not necessarily. It's the number of objections that make correct points in planning terms, not the number of objections. Otherwise, we would have refused many things before now that had several hundred objections. But those objections were not on planning matters or not correctly applied planning matters. Caroline.
I just wanted to ask, sorry, I might have missed it when I was reading through, but it's just the questions on page 41 about that have sort of come up in the process. The kitchen one, I think, is the one that I've got the question about, is if there were actually 9 people, is the kitchen actually big enough for 9, and will it have the adequate ovens and fridges? And yeah, it says the table's not big enough, but yeah, basically, is there room for 9 people in the kitchen area that's provided? I mean, I know they've kind of made a double kitchen living area, but is it actually going to be adequate, do we think, for 9 people?
Yeah, I think in summary, yes, it has been assessed against sort of the licensing standards. And like I say, they, again, in the SPD, it refers to those as kind of the applicable standard. And yeah, kind of based on the officer assessment, kind of we consider that it meets those standards.
Thank you. Paula?
Just for clarification, can the bicycle shed be accessed through that passageway at the back? Or did I read somewhere that the bicycles have to go through the house?
Well, my understanding is because there is a rear access, it could potentially be accessed out onto Manworthy Road to the north.
Jonathan, we can ask Harry to comment on that from Transport Development Management.
Hi. So originally, the access lane wasn't included in the red line boundary as part of the application, so I asked for it to be included because otherwise, through process of elimination, they'd have to cycle them through the house. So that's maybe what you saw, Paula, in previous comments. But now that access lane is included, and that access lane, I think, is between 1.1 and 1.2 metres, which is the standard width for cycle access. So, yeah, it can.
Thanks. Good piece of work. Any other questions, or shall we move to discussion? Okay, we move to discussion. Who would like to open up the discussion, or would you indeed like to have discussion? Okay, Councillor Durston.
Thanks. So I just wanted to say one thing, actually, because I'm thinking about an HMO that has just gone through in Philwood, and it's going to be a 16-bed HMO, and it went to the inspector. So it was initially refused by the council on application for 18, and it went to the inspectorate, and it's been reduced to 16, and that's now gone through. But there was only 4 objections to that, although it was initially refused by the council. So I was surprised that it went through. So I just think that's something to bear in mind when we're looking at some of these actual smaller applications, is that if it were to go to the inspectorate, I imagine it would go through at that level.
Indeed, Simone would like to comment on that.
That was exactly the point I was making earlier. The additional thing to bear in mind was if this went to the inspectorate, basically refused against officer recommendation, there is an encouragement there's a written ministerial statement still in place from the Secretary of State from December 2023 that encourages costs award in those situations. So just to be really, really careful that we ideally want to avoid that situation.
Thank you, because, resource in one area, extra resource in one area is less resource in the area of enforcement, which is a matter that we discussed earlier, wasn't it? Councillor Stone.
Yeah, okay. So I know that we have, it feels to me that some of the material considerations have been considered, and we have possibly, introduced enough sound insulation to provide an adequate measure of noise protection. However, I would still really recommend that sometimes I do feel that we are back here again about mental health considerations or environmental considerations, or just the acceptance of constantly changing our housing, our family housing, into HMOs that will provide homes, or lack of homes actually, for 9 people as a council, regardless of your decision. You have decided that we cannot fight this. We seriously need to be considering, what we are building and how we want to continue housing people in our city. Thank you.
Well, obviously we are developing a new local plan, but we work within the context of national planning policy framework, and we also need to remember there are individuals who need housing as well. It's not just about families.
No, we understand that. I understand what you're saying, and I've explained that in my statement. However, we really do seriously need to consider what we are providing for people in our city. And every time we say, we can't, we just allow this to happen, we detriment people in our city and the living standards of our city.
It's a point of view. Thank you. Councillor Gooch?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to live in... I don't think this place would be too bad with 6 people. With 9, I think it will be real squash. But at the same time, we're dealing with hundreds of caravans, and things are really kicking off where I live because of the number of caravan dwellers that we've got. So we really need somewhere for people to go.
Councillor Poultney, can we remember that we're assessing a particular application here, not redesigning a local plan? Just as a, helpful hint, I hope. A hopeful hint, I hope, to guide you. Councillor Poultney.
Thank you. I appreciate Councillor Stone wants to come back in. This may be helpful, but I just wanted to flag one of the first hearings I sat on when I came back on the council. This was a case of Oak Road in Bishopston, where the committee was given absolute assurances by officers that we could not say no to that HMO. Didn't meet the sandwiching test, didn't meet the concentration test, couldn't turn it down on the basis of residential immunity. The officer went to the extent of putting in a PowerPoint presentation in the largest font they could reasonably put. This is not a basis on which you can refuse this application. And the committee chose to defer it. And lo and behold, the evidence came back that it was a perfectly legitimate refusal. And when the applicant appealed, the planning inspector came back to make absolutely clear that the committee was well within its rights to question that data, and we held that decision on appeal despite it being made against officer recommendation. And I think we need to be really careful that whilst it is important to make these decisions on the basis of policy, and it is something that we should bear in mind, that sometimes I think we are massively overcautious in issues like this. We have 98 representations from the members of the public saying that this will cause an unacceptable impact in their area. And on the other side of that, we have a report from an internal report from the Council's Pollution Control Department on the basis of no visit, no evidence gathered beyond a desktop study, to say, no, it'll be fine with some additional noise insulation. I agree wholeheartedly with the points made about residential amenity. As someone who lived in HMOs for a very, very long time, this is not providing the kind of housing that will alleviate the housing crisis. This is providing the kind of housing that worsens it. I want to make absolutely clear, all this does is create more of an incentive for landlords to buy more and more houses, taking them out of the wealth pool that's enjoyed by the population at large, and concentrating wealth in the hands of fewer and fewer individuals who buy more and more houses and further restrict the housing supply in the city. It's this kind of phenomenon that causes the housing crisis, doesn't alleviate it. I want to be absolutely clear that can happen. I say that not to make a particular point against our planning policy, but just to address some of the points that have been made here. In respect of what's in front of us right now, I think we should look at DM2, I think we should look at DM30, and that we should defer this application to give officers a chance to prepare reasons for refusal in lines with our policy.
Yeah. The single question before us is whether this is compliant with planning policy as exists, not whether it's useful for the city or not useful for the city. We write policies that create the city that we like, and we have policies in place, and we assess this application according to those policies, and we have a new local plan coming now, hopefully with policies that are refined to produce the kind of city we would like for the future. So please do not obfuscate the matter by bringing in wider political points. The question is this or is this not compliant with planning policy? That's what's before you. Anybody else wish to comment before we move to the decision? Councillor O'Rourke.
I don't want to see this happening either. You know, I agree with what people, I don't think anybody on this committee really approves in the sense of wanting to have 9 people living in this house that's a 3-bedroomed terraced house. And, you know, there's no sense of a community being built. I mean, I know it seems a ridiculous thing to focus on, but the table with 6 chairs around it is indicative of what the capacity of the house is.
Quite a ridiculous thing, Paula, with the
It's not quite a ridiculous thing, and it's a point that I want to make. So, and I'm making my points because that's what I'm here for. So, I am very conflicted about this because it is a challenge, and I see the logic of it, and I see the fact that, you know, you're asking the question, you know, can we refuse it? And I'm not sure that we can refuse it because, you know, we've got the evidence in front of us, and I regret that. But, you know, your report is there, and when it comes to the vote, I'll make my mind up. But, you know, it's not something that I like. And don't tell me what to think.
Councillor Stone.
Well, I think Councillor Pulteney has spelled out quite clear that we can refuse it under the regulations, and therefore we should refuse it. We should
No, you can refuse it, of course. I've made the point that you're assessing it against current planning policy.
Excuse me. Can you stop talking over me, for goodness sake, Councillor
Make your
Alexander?
point. Make your point.
My point is that I've already stated my point, and in response to Councillor Gooch, there are many people that would prefer their own space than having to live in a 9-bedroom HMO. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Gooch.
Yeah, I mean, I would prefer if this was a limited to 6 people, given that some are, it's 6 bedrooms, not 9 bedrooms, but I'm still a little bit worried about the plan for the kitchen, which shows 1 sink, 1 hob, when it should have 2. So I was, thinking this needs to be inspected once it's actually done to make sure that it's actually up to standard. But I don't know. I don't think that's part of our purview, is it? So.
No is the simple answer to that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it's minimum standard, and I do agree that there's the HMOs. The problem is that the amount of money they bring in effectively do push up the price of housing, because everything's bought up by developers who can bid a lot more because they charge twice as much for the same space. But that isn't something that we can address in this space today, so I'm conflicted about it, but I'll probably vote in favour.
Councillor Pulteney.
I just want to make it absolutely clear. We absolutely can vote against this on the basis of the effect on the amenity of the surrounding area. We've got policy in place to address that directly. And if you don't doubt that adding a 9-person HMO in someone that's already experiencing these challenges will make things worse, by all means vote for it. But we have the policy that lets us vote against it. And if we vote against it, as the officer says, they can go to a 6-bedroom HMO anyway. We're stuck with that. But in terms of an increase to 9, we absolutely have a policy basis for turning that down. And whilst I sympathise with the points that councillors make around the housing crisis, I say again, I'm not making a decision on this basis, but if people are adducing points in reference to the need to provide more housing, which I do think is a reasonable focus for this committee, it is the basis of a lot of our planning policy is to try and address that problem. It is also worth acknowledging this does not do that. And I live in a ward where every single property footprint is assessed against, but we could stick 10 students in there, massively overpaying at £800-900 a month, and that's simply, there's no more lucrative use than that, than an HMO for that footprint. The only guard against that, the only guard against every property in our area being bought up by speculators and investors is the planning policy that says if you go too far, you have these impacts. These impacts are present on this site already. 98 people have written to us to say that these impacts are there and they're a problem. We have a basis for turning it down on the basis of those impacts. And if the officers come back and cannot find planning reasons, cannot articulate that in reasons that the policy can support, then by all means, let's vote it through then. Yeah. But from where we are right now, I say we defer. We give officers a chance to write this up in such a way that reflects the concerns expressed in this committee and bring it back to us. I think that's exactly what our policy says we have to do. We should do. I agree with it. I think that is our best course of action.
Councillor Durston.
So I just want to say, obviously, I think there's lots of factors that contribute to the housing crisis. I think safeguards against large houses being turned into student properties might also include building more student accommodation, building more council housing, but I don't think they are conversations for this committee. And I do feel that this application meets all the material planning considerations. I don't think there are planning considerations that we can use to turn it down.
Thank you. Any further comments? Okay, in that case, I propose the officer recommendation, which is that we should approve this, and I will go round one by one. Take a note, please. To see if you agree with that. Councillor Pulteney?
Against.
Councillor Macaulay?
Against.
Against.
Sorry, against.
Against.
And against. Against. Councillor Badruddin?
For.
Councillor Durston?
For.
Councillor Gooch?
For.
And myself for. That makes 4. 4 against, and with my casting vote, it's approved. Thank you. The next meeting will be on July the 16th at 2 p.m. Thank you very much, everyone.